Well, welcome again on this Barefoot Sunday. Thank you for being here today. And it's appropriate that on Barefoot Sunday we have missionaries leaving for Liberia, my home. Kenneth and Christy and your family, thank you for going. Church, they need help getting there. Church, can we get them there? Can we do that? Church, can we rally and do that? So please stop and see how you can help get their plane ticket or get behind them monthly on your way out at their table. I also want to say welcome to Grace Hayes. Welcome back. This is your home away from home. Good to have you. We're going to give you a mic on the last song. Your mic's in the back there, so all right. I'm kidding. Okay, great. And then Brett and Sally Johnson are here this morning on Barefoot Sunday. Brett's longtime mentor and friend of mine. Brett, good to have you here this morning. And Sally. All right, on Barefoot Sunday, today I want to talk about feet. I want to talk about your feet. I want to talk about where your feet lead you, because where your feet take you, that is who you are. I want you to think about that today. Where your feet take you, that is who you are. And isn't that true? That the places that you go end up defining the person that you become. When we look at Jesus Christ, his feet took him all kinds of places where people thought a religious man, a holy man, should not be going. He crossed roads and broke down barriers and went to people and places that a lot of people thought he should not go. But the world changed because of it. So I want to ask you as we start this Barefoot Sunday, where is God leading you right now? Where is God telling you to go? Where does God want your feet to walk? What is God telling you to do? What is he asking you to give up? And what is he asking you to take off on this Barefoot Sunday? This message today is about how God can use your feet and use your feet to even redirect your life. Maybe today is a day when your feet need to start going in a new direction, in a different direction. And I want to tell you this, when you start going the direction that Jesus Christ is leading you, you will meet people and change people's lives along the way when you start following the direction that he's taking you. Feet, I think, are very religious, right? We don't think much about feet. My wife hates it when my feet touch her in bed, but I think feet are very religious as we talk about feet on Barefoot Sunday. This line, where your feet take you, that is who you are. That comes from Frederick Buechner. Frederick Buechner was a well-known 20th century theologian, Presbyterian minister, preacher, and prolific writer. And he says this in his book, The Alphabet of Grace. He says, where your feet take you, that is who you are. Where your feet lead you begins to define you and change you, and you become that person to the places that you go. When I say that, I think of my nephew, Paul. Paul is just graduated from high school a few years ago, and he took a gap year. And as part of his gap year, he wanted to go to Japan because before he was born, his parents had been missionaries in Japan, and he heard them tell all these stories about Japan, but he had never been. So he flies to Japan by himself. All he has is a backpack and running shoes. And his plan is to start at the very north tip of Japan and run the entire length of Japan, about 1,000 miles. That was his plan. And so over the course of 3 months, he runs all day with his backpack on. And then when he would arrive in a town, he would just hope for the kindness of strangers to feed him and give him somewhere to sleep. One night, he has nowhere to sleep, and he had a pup tent in his backpack. And so he sets it up, he falls asleep, and 2 Japanese raccoons steal his shoes and chew them up, and he can't wear them the next day. So he ends up walking into town barefoot, and the only running shoes he can find are these shoes. Have you seen these with fingers, all right, where your toes fit in like a glove? Kind of creepy and sweaty and gross. But he runs half of Japan in those glove shoes, and it makes it through. At the end of the trip, he decides he's an expatriate now. He doesn't want to live in this country anymore. And he's married someone, and now they're living in other countries and other places. Where your feet take you, that is who you become. That is who you are. And so my question to you this morning on this Barefoot Sunday is, where is God leading your feet? Who is God wanting you to become? I think if you want to know who you are, what kind of person you are, then look at your feet and where are they taking you. Are your feet taking you to the best places? Are your feet taking you to the hard places in this world to do something good? Or are your feet only leading you towards places of pleasure and leisure? Or are your feet only taking you to the worst places? Like I said, where your feet take you defines who you are and who you become. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 9, Paul writes, walk in a manner that is worthy of the Lord. And then I have this, 1 John 2:6, whoever claims to abide in Christ must walk as Jesus walked. The Bible has a lot to say about Jesus' feet, don't they? We read, for example, that Mary sat at his feet. We read that another Mary came and washed his feet with her hair and with perfume. We read that Jesus' feet walked on water. And then we read that Jesus took water and he washed the feet of his disciples. Isaiah says that the Messiah, Jesus, his feet will trample the serpent. And then we read also that Jesus' feet lead him to the cross, where they put nails through his feet. But then he becomes the Savior of of the world. That's because of the places that Jesus was willing to walk. And so I want you to think about your feet and where your feet are taking you and where your feet are leading you. Where your feet take you, that is who you are. What do I mean by that? I mean that where our feet leads us, begins to define who you are. And the places that you go begin to change you. Think about that with me. I have a friend at the Grove here named John. And every second Wednesday, every 2 Wednesdays a month, John serves in our sanctuary ministry. Our sanctuary ministry is to immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. And we host them here at the Grove, and we help them get to their new homes in our country. And we meet their needs when they arrive. And so John found me not long ago, and he said, Palmer, he said, I got to be honest with you. I was very skeptical about this sanctuary ministry, that the Grove, should Christians be meeting the needs of refugees and immigrants and asylum seekers? He said, but then I volunteered, and I showed up on a Wednesday, and I started to help the people who were there, help them get a shower. We gave them clean clothes and then put shoes on their feet. And then I started driving them to the airport. And he said, as I served with them, I began to hear their stories. And as I heard their stories, it changed my heart. It changed how I viewed the immigrant and the refugee and the asylum seeker. He said, and I'm sharing this with you, Palmer, so that if anyone ever comes to you from the Grove and says, should the Grove really be serving immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees? He said, then tell them to walk in here on a Wednesday afternoon and serve with us. He says, I think it will change their heart and change their minds. Where your feet take you, the places that you go, that becomes who you are. It begins to change us and change you. It defines you. And I think where you go says a lot about who you are. And so, where is God leading you right now? Because if you think about it, the things we experience in life, they shape us and define us. I say this because who you are is not just about what you think and what you believe. Who you are is also defined by what you do and where you go. So as we start this Serve the World month, I want to give you a brief theology of compassion. One of the classes I teach at Justice College is a theology of justice and compassion. Now I want to give you a brief theology of compassion today. And it starts with this. Any theology starts with right thinking, starts with orthodoxy. Now, orthodoxy is about what you know, what you understand, what you believe. And I think most of us as Christians in our country, we are very good at orthodoxy. Most of us know what we believe and why we believe it. And and the problem is, though, that many Christians just make following Jesus Christ about their orthodoxy, what we know and what we believe and what we think. Now, don't get me wrong, those are essential and critical elements, but that's only half of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. The other half is this, is that we need orthopraxy. Orthopraxy refers to what we do. And many times we have right orthodoxy, we have right thinking, but there are many people who say they follow Jesus Christ, they even go to church, but they have almost no orthodoxy. They're not putting it into practice. Many Christians, I think, are only halfway to what it means to be a full follower of Jesus Christ. After one of our first Barefoot Sundays, and I came in the courtyard here, a gentleman came up to me afterwards, and he says, Palmer, just so you know, the people in Africa will not need your shoes in heaven. And man, it just hit me in my heart. Because what he was saying was, we only need to teach people what is right and what to believe. We don't need to actually do anything for them. But that's not how Jesus walked on earth. People like him miss it. And it's like on the t-shirts that Paul has for our Serve the World month. He has speak love, which we're called to do, and then act love and live love and do love. It's not just speaking and preaching only. Jesus was always doing orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Whatever need was in front of him. Sometimes it was just orthopraxy. He would heal a blind man. Sometimes it was orthodoxy. Sometimes he was teaching. Sometimes he was doing both. We are called to speak love, and we're called to do love and to live love. I have this by Scott McKnight. Scott McKnight is one of my favorite theologians today. He teaches at North Park University in the Chicago area. It's an evangelical covenant school, and this is in his book, One Life, and he writes, many think Jesus came to earth so you and I can have a special kind of spiritual experience and then go merrily along. As long as we pray and read our Bible and develop intimacy with the unseen God, but ignore the others-orientated life of justice and love and peace that Jesus embodied. When I hear Christians describe the Christian life as little more than soul development and personal intimacy with God, and I do hear this often, I have to wonder if Christians even read their Bibles. I mean, really read them so that the utter realities of Jesus are seen for what they are. I'm upset about this. You've probably detected it. Maybe you want me to calm down or knock it off. Isn't that good? You need the book. You need to buy his One Life. But he's right that sometimes we miss that our faith is both about something we speak and something that we do. Jesus was constantly connecting what we think to what we do. And as we talk about a theology of compassion today, I want to show you what the Old Testament and how it connects to the New Testament. Because I think sometimes as Christians, we can forget that the entire Bible keeps calling us to issues of justice and compassion. So I brought a few samples from the Old Testament just to show you of how it connects with what Jesus calls us to do. This is Leviticus. And we could read practically all the Old Testament books and pull out dozens of more, hundreds, thousands of more references. When you reap the harvest in your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field. Leave them for the poor and the foreigners. Next. Deuteronomy, for there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore, I command you, you shall open wide your hand to both to your brother, to the needy, to the poor in your land. Psalms, defend the cause of the poor, of the people, give deliverance to the children of the needy, and crush the oppressor. Proverbs, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Isaiah, share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house. When you see the naked, cover them. Again in Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. Next, Jeremiah, do what is right. Help those in need of justice. Quit your evil deeds. Protect the rights of aliens and immigrants, orphans and widows. Such a beautiful passage. This is Job, I delivered the poor who cried for help and the fatherless who had none to assist them. Micah, what does the Lord require of you? To do justice and show compassion and walk humbly with your God. Amos, let justice roll on like a river. There you go. Now Zechariah. Do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, the sojourner, or the poor. I mean, do you see this call for compassion and justice and mercy? It beats through Scripture like a drum. And like I said, Jesus continually connects this Old Testament theology to who we are today. For example, look at Luke chapter 4 with me. And Jesus walks into his boyhood village, we read in verse 16, and he goes into the synagogue, and we read that he stood up to read the scriptures, and the scroll of Isaiah was handed to him. So he's reaching back to the Old Testament. And he unrolls the scroll, and he finds a place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news for the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free." So do you see how Jesus, in his very first sermon, calls us to be people who do orthopraxy, who don't just speak the good news, but we actually do the good news. But when Jesus arrives on the scene in first century Israel, following God had become very legalistic, had become very cognitive. There was good orthodoxy and there was no orthopraxy. And I'll be honest, that is still a problem in our country today. And I've seen it's entirely possible to make our spirituality so inner and so personal and so private that it never changes how I live to people out there. But all through the Gospels, Jesus reminds us that following God takes both good orthodoxy and good orthopraxy. In Luke chapter 10, he tells an orthopraxy story. You know the story well. We call it the story of the Good Samaritan. And how does it go? We have the man who's beat down and robbed laying on the side of the road. And then two very religious people come by, a priest and a Levite who works in the temple. And both the priest and the Levite, they walk around him. And Jesus' entire point is they had good orthodoxy, but they had terrible orthopraxy. And Jesus says this has to change. If you keep reading in Luke, we come to a story, a discussion that Jesus has with a man, a wealthy man we read, about orthodoxy and orthopraxy. So you can turn there with me in Luke chapter 18. A certain ruler asks Jesus, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus tells him what he needs to do. And he says, all these things I have kept since I was a boy. And so the man is saying, I've had great orthodoxy my entire life. When Jesus heard this, he said to him, "You still lack one thing. You still lack orthopraxy. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And then come and follow me." When the man heard this, he became very sad because he had great wealth. So this conversation, in my opinion, it gets really awkward. Jesus says, "Hey, Bob, you got to sell everything." And the guy goes, no, I can't do that. It gets really hard. The rich young ruler thinks this is a really bad plan. In Mark chapter 10, we read this, "And the man's face fell, and he walked away sad because he had great wealth." Like I said, where your feet take you, it changes you. It changes your heart. It changes your attitude, changes your passions, changes your actions. I want to give you a where your feet take you. I want to give you a challenge. We're going to call this the Feet Journal Challenge. In fact, you can put this on TikTok and you might get famous, all right? That wasn't a plan when I came into this, but this is the TikTok, all right, Feet Journal Challenge. And the challenge is this: starting today, I want to ask you to keep a notepad or a piece of paper next to your bed with a pen. And starting today, for the next 7 days, before you fall asleep, take that and write down a list of all the places where your feet walked. And then at the end of 7 days, I want you to look at this journal and do an assessment of where are the places that your feet walked most. Because where your feet take you, that is who you are. All right, here's the next thought that I want to challenge you with today is that you shape the places where your feet take you. That when you walk into a place, not only does it define you and change you and shape, but when you walk into any place, whether it's your work or your hospital floor or into your school or your college or into your home, God has given you influence to shape the places where your feet take you. I've seen this happen my entire life in ministry. In fact, I've seen it happen in my own life. It was one of my first lessons that you have the ability to shape the places where your feet take you. When my senior year of college at Biola University in La Mirada, California, I got a job down the street at the church that I was going to, Granada Heights Friends Church. And at the church, they had a school. It was a junior high school, elementary through junior high school, but they needed a junior high PE teacher. So my senior year of college, I worked at Lindsay School teaching PE. And then when I graduated, my good friend Brett Johnson right here got me the job as a junior high director at Granada Heights Friends Church. But I still had this commitment to teach PE for the next 9 months. So I was both a junior high director that first year and a PE teacher at Lindsay School. Well, my first Wednesday night, I remember going in on a Wednesday night. It's my first Wednesday night. I'm in charge of this youth group. And I look at the kids, and it was a kind of a small group, but I only see one kid there from Lindsay School, where I taught PE. Now, there were only 28 7th and 8th graders. It was a small Christian school. The only kid there was Eric Oldenburg. And Eric Oldenburg, by the way, is an incredible man today. And after he graduated from college, he served in Liberia. Then he taught seminary in Ukraine for years, and now he teaches at Talbot Seminary. But the only kid there is Eric Oldenburg from the school. And so the next week, when I'm teaching PE, I'm telling these kids, hey, you got to show up Wednesday night. You got to come Wednesday. So I'm inviting every kid that I could talk to come on Wednesday. I'm trying to grow my youth group. The next week, I have like 6 kids from Lindsay School. The week after that, there's like a dozen kids from Lindsay School. And I start taking some of them out to play basketball, to McDonald's, to hit golf balls at Big T. And a few weeks later, we have like 20. About 6, maybe it was 7 weeks in, I counted the Lindsay School kids from where I taught PE. All 28 kids were there on a Wednesday night. Then later that fall, we had our winter camp. 21 of those kids prayed to receive Jesus Christ. And that we can applaud what God did there. I was just a PE teacher, telling kids to show up. And I didn't know I had influence, and I share that just to say that you have influence. You walk into your workplace maybe, into your business, and you think you don't have influence. You do. In the name of Jesus Christ, you shape the places where your feet take you. You have that same influence. Jesus, every place that he walked into, when you read the Gospels, he's changing things. He's shaping lives. He's changing people. In John chapter 4, he walks into this Samaritan town. You know the story well of the woman by the well who he meets. The story ends like this. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed, and they urged him to stay 2 more days. He changes the entire community because that's where he walks into. So my question to you is, where is God leading you to make a difference? You see, sometimes we think someone else will change what's not right in this world. And I want to remind you that God is sending you into places where your feet take you to shape those places and to change things. God wants you to stop the injustice. He wants to use your life to do that. He wants you to show compassion. He wants you to speak up. He wants you to make things right that are wrong in this world. He wants you to take action. We started doing Barefoot Sunday a little over 10 years ago. Maybe it started with my own story. Most of you know that I grew up in the Liberian jungle in the world's thickest rainforest. And I grew up with the Sapo people. For 7 years, we lived with the Sapo tribe. I lived in a bamboo mat house. You've heard me say that, with no running water or electricity. And all of my friends, all of them, were barefoot every day. We played soccer. When we played soccer, they were barefoot. Very few of them had shoes. Not only that, did they not have shoes, but they would get jiggers. Jiggers it's a small, tiny flea the size of a parasite, and it gets under your toenail. It buries in the skin around your toenails, and then it multiplies. They grow 2,000 times their size, and then they multiply by the thousands. And so when we're playing soccer almost every afternoon, one of the kids' toes would bust open bleeding because the jiggers had popped and he's bleeding. And so we would take them home to my mom, and this was usually our after dinner. We would sit on the front steps of our bamboo mat house, and my mother would bring out her sewing needle and a box of matches. She would light it, and she would sterilize the needle, and then she would pick and squeeze the jiggers out of my friend's toes. That's how I grew up. And so when I started going back to Africa with people from the Grove, I would say, could you bring your extra shoes with you? And because I always knew that there were friends of mine and people I knew who needed shoes. It was one of the most prized possessions in the jungle, and still is in many parts of Liberia or Malawi where we go. And finally I realized we don't have enough shoes. We need everyone's shoes. And plus, I wanted everyone here at our church to get what it was like to be among the poorest of the poor in the world. About 1/5 of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day. But I don't think we feel that. Let's be honest. In the East Valley and Chandler and Gilbert and Tempe, we don't feel that so much, do we? And I wanted people to feel it. So that's why we plan to have our first Barefoot Sunday. And after we had one of our first Barefoot Sundays, someone came up to me and they said, well, Palmer, you can't put shoes on all the bare feet in Africa. But my response is this, at least we can put shoes on 5,000 bare feet today. And maybe it'll be 10,000. At least we can do that, right? You see, God has given you one life to live, and you live this very important life. And the problems of this world aren't someone else's problem, and some people make you feel like they're too big for solving. But I want to remind you today that you're giving your shoes is saying that I want to meet those problems one person at a time, one life at a time, and I can do something. Because I think sometimes we need to realize that all the words in the world are not enough, and you must do something. Sometimes all the thoughts and prayers are not enough, and you must do something. Sometimes even all the financial donations are not enough, and you must do something. I want to end with this final challenge today, is to let your feet take you to the places where Jesus walked. When you think about where the places that Jesus walked into the homes of the sick and the broken. So are you willing to do that? Jesus walked with the poor and the desperate. Will you do that? Jesus walked into a stoning circle to stop an injustice. Will you do that? Jesus walked towards the outsider and toward the foreigner. Will you do that? Daniel Strickland really challenges all Christians in her book, Just Imagine. She says this. She says, just imagine a world where every Christian and the church as a whole are passionate to live justly, where Christians toss and turn at night because children die due to a lack of clean water, or because other children step on landmines while they play. Just imagine a world where the church is restless to do something about poverty, racism, malnutrition, and environmental destruction. A world where Christians all have friends who are poor, friends of another skin color and ethnicity, and fires of hope are extinguished. A church where our love for God is measured not by how many love songs we sing to Jesus that we can sing in an hour, but by our actions to bring justice, mercy, and faith to other people. Imagine such a world. And so I want to give you that challenge today. I want to invite you to become a person who's willing to take off their shoes and walk the holy ground of a broken world. Because when you take off your shoes today, you say something. Yes, we need your shoes. We're going to share these in Liberia. But when you take off your shoes, you are declaring something in the name of Jesus. For example, when you take off your shoes, you say, I will walk where Jesus walked. See, Jesus was always inviting people to follow him. He said that over and over. Will you follow me? Will you walk where I walk? When you take off your shoes, you say, I will walk where Jesus walked. When you take off your shoes, I think you find solidarity with the poor and the oppressed. When Moses saw the burning bush, you remember this? God starts to speak to him through the burning bush. And the first thing that God says to Moses through the burning bush, he says, Yahef. Yahef means take off your shoes. And so Moses takes off his shoes, and God says, take off your shoes because the ground is holy. And why is the ground holy? Yes, because God is there. But do you know that the ground where the poor walk is holy because God, Scripture keeps telling us that God is with the poor and the oppressed. So he tells Moses, take off your shoes and walk with my people who have been slaves in Egypt. He said, I want you to go to the poor in Egypt, to my slaves who have been making bricks barefoot, and walk them out of Egypt. So Moses takes off his shoes to follow God. It's a statement today when you take off your shoes that you find solidarity with the poor. When you take off your shoes, you say, I have enough, so I will share more. The average American has, you know this already, at least 2 cars. The average American household has 2 cars. The average American home has 3 TVs. You probably have more. The average American household has 3 cell phones. I'm guessing you have more. The average American home has 65 shoes. So when you take off your shoes today, you're saying, I have more than enough, and I will share. And finally, when you take off your shoes, you walk the holy ground of a broken world. We ask you to spend the rest of the day barefoot so that you can feel how 1.5 billion people feel every day. If you go out to dinner or if you go to lunch, out to lunch, I invite you to walk into that restaurant barefoot. You will feel the shame. If you go shopping, walk into that store barefoot so you can feel people looking at you, feel the embarrassment. It's okay. It's one day. Can you do that? If you're going to do yard work, do it barefoot. It's not easy. If you're going to go on a walk or on a jog, do it barefoot because you walk the holy ground of a broken world. Church, can I ask you to stand? And would you share your shoes today? Would you do that? Maybe you didn't plan to when you got here, but today is your time to do that. So bring them up, everybody.